Welcome. My name is William Messecar. I'm a master model railroader in the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. I want to welcome all of you to the virtual layout tour we'll have presented today by members of the NMRA. We would encourage you to find out about the NMRA and join in order to participate in these virtual tours. We have other virtual clinics and other activities for the National Model Railroad Association that we think you'll find a big help to your modeling, and you'll get to meet model railroaders just like you. So welcome to our tour, and I hope you enjoy it.
We'll now have Bill Messecar show us his Santa Fe layout. Bill?
Yeah, my thanks to Lee. What a beautiful layout, and appreciate him sharing that all with us. It's an amazing work. I model a different part of the country, although we have the train GWS in common, because that train, the symbol stands for Great Northern Western Pacific and Santa Fe, and it was a train operation through the Inside Gateway down to Stockton and down to the Santa Fe and then back as SWG. So it actually operates over my layout in the 3rd District. I moved up here in the late 90s and live in an area called Winterwood in Kent, and then eventually moved into the house we occupy now in 2004 after I retired. When we moved in here, I did not have a layout and wanted to have one, but I had next to the house a large pad where the guy had a basketball court, and my basketball days were long gone. Looked at that, decided I could build a garage type building, and did to house this layout. So I had that building built by a company in Tacoma, basically a garage with a garage door headed in, but it was all wall boarded, and it's a 24 by 28 foot structure to house the layout. It's an HO, which is what I modeled in for 60 years or so. Got a very good piece of advice from my good friend John Thompson to build it at one level, at least with no duck under, and that was very smart. My duck under days are long gone. The layout consists of 3 20-foot peninsulas shaped like the letter E. If you hold up your left hand and take your first 3 fingers, you're looking at the design of my layout. The first peninsula along the back is 3 feet wide. The next 2 are 6 feet wide, divided by a scenic divider that's 2 feet above the layout surface. The layout height is about 48 inches up to about 52 inches and then back down. So there's some grade. Anyway, these are connected along the back. I model a group of towns, and I'm going to go through the geography here because this probably isn't familiar to everybody. The theme was citrus packing, orange packing, orange protective service that occurred in Southern California. There was well over 100 packing houses located in the greater Los Angeles area back in the 40s, 1940s, and 50s. And the Santa Fe, and of course the Southern Pacific and the Union Pacific to a lesser extent had similar operations of taking this citrus and moving it to the east and to the north. And the Santa Fe did exactly that. They had a very large division point yard in San Bernardino, which is about 90 miles east of Los Angeles, where all of the freight was collected and built into trains that would move east and north over Cajon Pass. Protective service means that these loads and perhaps others like them would require service to ensure that the load arrived in top condition. And in the case of oranges, they want to travel at about 35 degrees, 36 degrees. Very cold, not at freezing, but just above freezing, to prevent the fruit. So it provides the fruit arrives in excellent condition. It's not designed so that it keeps maturing as it's traveling. It's designed to deliver it in top condition. So the Santa Fe built a pre-cooler there. The SP had one in another location, and that was designed to pump cold air in through these. I wanted to simulate that operation as well, and I have that on my layout. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The era for me was transition, not so much because I didn't grow up in the southern, I actually grew up in the Portland, Oregon area, but really fell in love with the Santa Fe and learned a great deal about it over a number of years. And what I had collected and wanted to operate was in the early 50s, both steam and diesel. And also this was really the height of the citrus operation in the kind of traditional ice bunker 40-foot refrigerator car. There's still a considerable citrus operation, but it travels in different equipment now. And I also added later, after I had built the layout, a passenger terminal. I didn't have that in the original plan, and Lee mentioned that about be flexible and let things, develop. Somebody came up with an excellent idea, one of my regular helpers, where I could put this terminal. I built it along the back of the E, along the back wall, and that allowed me to add a passenger operation around my layout. Let's talk for a second about the geography of this. This is a map by John Signor, well-known SP and Santa Fe book developer and the magazine editors. Santa Fe, and you can kind of see my pointer. First district was the famous Cajon Pass from Barstow to San Bernardino. The second district was from Los Angeles along the San Gabriel Mountains and the famous Route 66 through Pasadena to San Bernardino. And I considered that's where the premier passenger trains, the Super Chief, the Chief, the El Capitan ran. But they had very little freight operation. At this time, most of the packing houses had given way to real estate development in the 1950s. And there was a local freight operation in each direction, but no through freights here because of a steeper grade in the Pasadena, Lamanda Park area. So simultaneously, when both of these lines were built, this proved to be a much better freight operation on the third district from Los Angeles through Fullerton, Corona, Riverside, and San Bernardino. It was a little bit longer, but a much lower grade, about 1.5%. And so all the through freights that operated out of San Diego and Los Angeles came and operated over the third district. And that's really what I was interested in. And there was still very significant citrus operation here, probably 5 or 6 packing houses in each of these towns, 2 or 3 in the smaller towns. The shaded orange area just shows you the extent of the citrus growth in this area in the late 40s, early 50s, and it was considerable here. So the fourth district, which completed the LA division, operated from Fullerton down to San Diego, really from Los Angeles to San Diego through Del Mar. So I chose to operate the third district and in citrus operation. So it had citrus turns, and the phrase turn refers to a freight operation that goes to a destination and then returns to its origin. And in this case, in Southern California, 85% of the freight was moving east. So it made no sense to run a local each direction because all that freight wanted to move east. So, and most of the traffic, probably 60 to 70% of the freight traffic was citrus. So the trains would be dispatched from San Bernardino to where the freight was going to be collected, would move to these towns and return with loaded citrus refrigerator cars that needed either icing or pre-cooling or both. They also all had considerable through freights because all of the freight trains going from GWS from the north, west, from Texas, from Chicago, were operating through Barstow, through San Bernardino, and to Los Angeles or San Diego. So all those trains operated there. And then the return of empties with some loads moving west would also operate over the third district. They had 2 passenger trains, so the Grand Canyon and the San Bernardino Local. The Grand Canyon was a through trade, a bit lower class than the top 3 trains that operated on the second district. So, but it had an interesting collection of older equipment, sleepers, heavyweight sleepers, some heavyweight coaches, some lightweight sleepers, a very eclectic combination of cars, and had steam longer than any of the other passenger trains. San Bernardino Local was a short local that ran both on the second and third district to Los Angeles and back, really kind of a commuter and shopping train that operated into the mid-50s. And I'll have a video of the layout with that train running on it at the end of my slideshow. And the other train that operated over there was the westbound fast mail, came fully laden with lots of cars carrying magazines, bagged mail, sealed mail, and express to Los Angeles, and then returned mostly empty over the second district as a fast passenger train. It also allowed for yard industry switching in San Bernardino. I've added a number of industries that weren't prototypically there, but made sense to this. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm going to show you some images of the different scenes. The one on the far right is my Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal. It's actually the back of what LAUPT would look like. These were located there. Here's an express building and a location for express. The baggage area where baggage cars were dropped off and picked up, sealed products were put in there, and then the RPO cars, this was a mail facility at the far end. And I have 4 tracks because I have a storage for these cars, and then 3 for the fast mail, the Grand Canyon, and the San Bernardino local. And this was added at the end of my layout a couple of years after I completed the layout. So the first scene, the other signature scenes in that area is the pre-cooler. You see that in the foreground in the bottom left. And that facility was built in the early part of the 20th century by the Santa Fe to do this protective service, this icing and pre-cooling. There were 2 docks which were just for icing, and there were 2 more docks which had icing and pre-cooling, and you can see the pre-cooling tubes in the back. These were designed to take chilled air that ran along underneath this concrete ramp, blew up through these tubes and into the open refrigerator hatches of these cars. So a load of citrus could be packed relatively quickly from harvest into a refrigerator car, brought that same evening out to San Bernardino, and that load would then be chilled very quickly. Well, it would take several hours, down to 35 degrees, and then iced. The other benefit to the shipper of this service was that the ice would last a lot longer. You get a lot more efficient cooling with the ice if you use the pre-cooling. I've actually modeled a scene in front, which is there all the time, and you can see 3 refrigerator cars there with some workers. That's actually, all of that's from a kit that Sunshine Models produced years ago of ice chunks and the tools that you would use to move the ice in there. And I built little patches in these Intermountain cars and loaded them with ice, and you can see that crushed ice in those refrigerator cars. There's one other kind of serendipitous story about this pre-cooler with these tubes. To get that thing to bend is not easy. I was having a meal at a local restaurant here in Auburn, and I got a ice cream soda, and they served it with a straw that had a bend in it. We used to see those all the time. Turns out that straw diameter was the perfect diameter for these pre-cooling tubes. So I was a frequent guest to this restaurant. I had to collect 4 of these straws to make one of those tubes, and I have 12 of them. So I got about 50 straws and made those into the pre-cooler, into the tubes that are in the pre-cooler, and they fit. The last piece was the in the yard area on the east end, and again, you'll see this in the video, is the engine facility with the sand house there that was at San Bernardino, large water storage, of course, and a cattle pen to rest cattle and so on. You can see a good example here of the peninsulas. The yard peninsula on the right, that's 3 foot wide and about 27 feet long from end to end. Then it connects to the second peninsula, which has the town of Riverside on this side. Then here's a kind of a more of a top view. You can see that the main line continuing around the corner and further to the west. You'd be looking west here to trace this line, this main line around the Elsinore branch. This was a branch that geographically went south out of the town of Corona, which is over here on the left. And I laid it along this main line, or put the main line behind it. These industries were located in this particular geography. Here's the town of Corona, really kind of the biggest town between San Bernardino and Los Angeles. Had name stands for Circle City. And it was originally built in a very unusual manner. The town had a large circular road that circled the town, and the town was built inside this road, and the road had big road races on it, like the Indianapolis 500 on this road. This went on for 3 or 4 years until town kind of grew, and all the industries were outside the circle. So that was the name Corona, which stood for circle. So here's the depot. This particular building on the far end was one of the biggest industries in town, and that was built by Sunkist to process lemons. Packing, growing and packing and selling lemons was a very different business than oranges. Oranges, most of it is sold as individual oranges with orange juice made from the oranges that aren't considered good enough quality, called culls, to sell individually. But in the case of lemons, many more lemons are grown that could ever be sold as individual lemons. So Sunkist early on for growers spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what other products can we produce from this. And of course, citric acid is one of the easiest, and eventually frozen lemonade. There was a plant right here, Borden's, which developed dry fruit juices, the famous Tang, the drink of astronauts that we all remember from, at least I remember from growing up, and pectin, which is used in jams and jellies. So that is a very big facility. If I built that to scale, it would have taken most of this room. Anyway, Corona had quite a bit of track work in it. Here is a panoramic shot of the last town, and you can see on the left the return back to the yard. This is the town of Placentia. There were 6 packing houses there. I've modeled 3 of those. The layout has a total of 8 packing houses and a pre-cooler on it. So it gives quite a bit of operation, and I have, well, let's talk about what trains we operate. So the yard represents both San Bernardino and Los Angeles, and you may recall from the photo I showed of the yard, there are 15 tracks there. The 7 closest to the aisle are the eastern side of the yard, representing San Bernardino, and the 7 on the west are Los Angeles, or the 7 farthest away are Los Angeles. And then there's one passenger storage track that I use now with the terminal to store sleepers and coaches. So freight trains are, well, it's really an open staging concept here. I thought initially when I was designing the layout maybe about having that hidden, but decided to make it an open staging, and it's much easier to operate that way. So freight trains are looked at the original operation about creating those trains by yard switching, but they take long enough that for my operation, they are blocked and pre-staged. So we typically will run 3 fruit turns, which are westbound initially. They'll go to one to Riverside, one to Corona, and one to Placentia, the 3 towns on the layout, and they will return to San Bernardino with their pickups. I also run a through freight, a westbound through freight and because there is some traffic that goes west, this is what the Santa Fe did. They would use a train coming from another destination that's traveling through to make local pickups en route to Los Angeles. And then I run a train which the Santa Fe called a Bulldog, which makes local setouts, empties principally, and a few loads from LA and San Diego en route to San Bernardino. My dispatching is done by train sequence. Basically, over time have figured out what order to run these trains to allow the crews to operate independently of each other. It wouldn't be good to have 2 local trains both trying to serve Corona at the same time. So I run those by sequence to permit that operation. And then a friend helped me install block detection signals, which control each of the 3 single track main lines. And in the video, you may see some of those. There's a single track main line between Riverside and Corona. That goes along behind Elsinore. There's one between Corona and Placentia, and the one that goes down the back of the layout, basically between Placentia and the yard. I want to talk for a minute about the program that I use to control or to operate the layout to do the car distribution that was written by Bruce Hanley called Railroad Operations or RROps or ROPS. It's a program I initially started with car cards and waybills, and I did that system for about 6 years and it worked well. I liked it. But of course, you're carrying around a big pack of cards. And so I saw this system on Russ's layout and I asked him about it and he got me in touch with Bruce and Bruce agreed to let me use the program. And I really enjoyed it a great deal. The program generates first you have to do the setup. We have to describe the trains, describe the spots, enter the cars. And I have over 200 freight cars on mine, but it didn't take that long to do all that. You have to describe your motive power. You have to enter bills that describe where, let's say, Corona Exchange Lemon, which was that big Sunkist processing place I mentioned, they would need a boxcar of sugar. They would need a boxcar of culls or a gondola of culls, cull lemons to make product with. You have to put those bills in there so the program knows what kind of car and where to send it. And then, of course, you want to describe the spots for Exchange Lemon, how many cars could be spotted there. Anyway, you enter that once and then the program will generate trains based on those bills and available cars. No more car cards and waybills. You have a couple of sheets describing your train. I'll show a picture of one in just a second. So we run these 5 freight trains pre-staged. I mentioned 3 fruit turns and 2 through freights, 1 east, 1 west. There's a local switching job that's run out of San Bernardino yard to service the pre-cooler, but there's also the engine, sand. There's an interchange with the Southern Pacific, and there's quite a few other industries that my friend Don Hubbard and I have added to the San Bernardino yard to make that job more interesting. So those are the trains that are run. The operating session target is generally 3 to 4 hours, and that tends to work pretty well. And then we have 3 passenger trains that are available to run, and those have to be made up. The program, unfortunately, will create those passenger trains, but it doesn't know a baggage car from a diner. So I don't use that program to do that. I have a preset consist that the crews use for passenger trains. Now, just to mention, since we were talking about operation in pandemic, I did have a little mini operating session here a week ago with masks, and it seemed to work pretty well. We're all still healthy as far as I know, with 2 crews of 2 people who were socially distanced and working in different parts of the layout room. So anyway, we had a little mini operating session. I was very hungry to get something going. So advantages to me of this are then the crews seem to really like this because it's very intuitive with the switch list, as you'll see. There's when you don't have to look through car cards and waybills and try to figure out, are these cars in this pocket, are these going with my train or not? It tells you exactly what you're supposed to pick up and where they're located. You get immediate train generation. They're all put together. You don't have to, and the nice thing is you don't have to go looking for waybills for empties where you've run out and you have to write more. And it generates those immediately, tells you if there's a conflict. You can edit those. It limits the spots to capacity. That's really a plus, and that's not something that it requires a lot of extra work with car cards and waybills. That's a real benefit with this program. It says, you can only put 2 cars in here, and here they are. It allows local moves, which means that if you have, let's say you have a refrigerator car that's needed at a packing house in Placentia, and you have one that's in a storage track, which is also a spot there in Placentia, it knows that that car is available and will have it moved by the turn that's coming to town over to the packing house. So that's a local, or if a boxcar is freed up in Corona and it's needed by the milling company, it'll allow you to do that. So you can turn that on or off as you wish. So for through trains, I don't use this, but for turnarounds and turns, it's something that's very useful. It shows the usage location of all cars in the layout. This is another nice feature. So you don't have any missing cars and waybills and car cards where you go to there and it's supposed to be there and you can't find the waybill or car card that goes with this card. You have an inventory that will show you exactly where the cars are. And when I'm done with a major session, then I print that out and go through and check that. The waybills in the program have a frequency function. So for instance, on the packing houses, I turn that way up so that the packing houses are getting a lot more cars than, let's say, a seed company or a lumber yard in town. And then, of course, you can edit the program to add things or remove things that you don't like. Or here's an example of the paperwork. This is a Placentia turn that we ran. This is a list of cars that will need to be pulled for this train, but here's the order that they're to be placed on the train. So the program will block those cars together. It does not know about leading or trailing turnouts, but when it blocks it like this, it's very easy to work. You just work the front of the back of the train. And then over in Placentia, this shows you all the different moves. Here's the covered hopper that the program said was going to inland cement, and here's the line that tells you to take it from the train and move it to inland cement. And you can do these in any order. They're all listed here, but you can work the train as a conductor and engineer in any order of this you want. You can check off the box to show you made this move. Here's a local move. Here's a Santa Fe refrigerator car that's on a drill track in the storage track of Placentia, and it's to be moved to Placentia Orange Growers Packing House. So that's called a local move. And then it prints up, these are the cars you're to return with. So it's a very good double check that I've made all the correct moves and I'm taking back to the yard only the cars that are supposed to return. So that's what the paperwork looks like. Okay, lessons learned. I pulled this list from Model Railroad Hobbyist a couple of years ago. First thing was to establish an overall plan and stick to it. And when I had the layout room built, had a track plan, which was relatively simple on pencil and paper, I wanted to have this thing done in 5 years. And so I established a plan, a date to finish the bench work, a date to begin laying track, a date to have the track wired, a date to begin operation, put scenery in, have the structures complete, and we stuck with it. We had that layout done in 5 years. Now it's changed a lot since then, and I'll talk about that, but that got us going. Plan your resources, space, time, and money, and particularly this one. You know, I started building this when I was, 66. So I didn't have 15 or 20 years to get this thing done. I wanted it done a lot faster. So one of the things I did was I had a handyman friend of mine build the benchwork for me, and he was a very good craftsman. And he had that done and installed in 2 months. And that let me begin. We were laying track within 10 months of that building being built. So that really saved a tremendous amount of time. The other thing, probably the most important thing, we had an active Santa Fe and have an active Santa Fe group of modelers here, and I recruited some wonderful helpers that really have allowed us to finish that layout and are still operators today of the train. So I scheduled regular work sessions, and that got the track wired, that got the scenery down, that got the carpet on the floor. We'd have regular work sessions about every 6 weeks, and we got a lot of work done in a hurry there. And then in addition, I went out and worked on a regular basis as well. As soon as we had the track wired up, we started doing some operation, even though we had really no scenery in and almost no structures. And I learned a great deal about some things that I needed to change on the layout, minor changes, things to add that weren't in my original track plan from that operation. And of course, you want to visit and operate on other layouts, that's a great source of ideas. So, okay, and then just before we go to the video, I'm going to close with a little story about my Jennings Lumber Company, which is a structure I love, which took me 35 years to make. And the reason it took me 35 years, I saw this kit when I worked in New York City for Pan American World Airways in the mid-70s. I saw this model railroad kit in a window over on 6th Avenue, and I fell in love with it. I just, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful, I got to buy this kit. And I bought it. It was rather expensive at the time, but I bought it. And I worked on it for about 6 months. It's, if any of you have ever looked at the plans for this thing, it's basically a huge folio of plans on a big box of sticks. There's no panels and the windows. So everything has to be built like you'd build a real building. So I worked on this for about 6 months, and I thought, man, this is too much. I got to put this away. And I put it away for about 34 years. So I finally got it back out again. I was retired and I finished it. And it's on my layout and I really love it. I put the interior in, all the stuff in the interior you see I added, and the figures and the machines did not come with the kit. But anyway, so persistence pays off as well. All right. I'd like to show you now a short video of my layout. I chose a passenger train, the San Bernardino local, which you see leaving the Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal behind a pair of Jeeps that were equipped by the Santa Fe for passenger service. And it's traveling now through the yard, and here's a scene of one of the signature structures on my layout, the pre-cooler at the San Bernardino yard. You can see some icing and pre-cooling going on in the background there. And here is the local, as it exits the yard, is going to be heading west through the towns of Riverside, Corona, and Placentia, and you'll see all of that in the video. This is my engine terminal. Had quite a bit of motive power there, and you see that on the 4 track. It's past the tower at Colton, which was just south of San Bernardino Yard, and enters the first town in Riverside, which, as I mentioned, is less than 20 miles away from San Bernardino, headed west. It will pass the depot and freight house there, which is a scratch-built structure for the freight house in Riverside. It then passes another of the signature structures on my layout. I already mentioned this thing took me 35 years to build. That's the Jennings Lumber Company there at the west end of Riverside. It's going to go along the back of Elsinore and then swing around and enter the town of Corona on my second peninsula. You can see the Exchange Lemon, a very big facility used for processing cull lemons and making frozen lemonade. The Borden's plant that made Tang and so on is just past the depot on the right, and the train will stop as it did at the Corona Depot and pick up a few passengers. It'll now depart Corona for Placentia. You can also see in the middle upper part the Corona Citrus Association structure. Here is passing Bradford Brothers in Placentia as it approaches the Placentia Depot. There's also a packing house to the left, the Placentia Orange Growers, as well as Placentia Mutual a little further down. There are actually 6 packing houses in Placentia, and I've modeled 3 of them. Now it's continuing out the west end past a orange grove, and you see the farmhouse there in the distance. Show another picture of the storage track or drill track there in Placentia, holding some refrigerator cars that will be taken to the packing houses. And the San Bernardino local then proceeds through Placentia and heads towards Los Angeles down the back access track on my layout. Hope you enjoyed that video and in my layout, and thank you. Hello again. This is another reminder that this virtual layout tour has been brought to you by members of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And we hope you've enjoyed it, and we want to encourage you to, again, find out about the NMRA online. Both PNR and NMRA have an excellent website where you can get information about joining and participating in this and other activities like our clinics that are held all over the region. So thank you for joining us today and wish you great modeling.